We're not gonna watch that one. Let's watch this one, guys. Um, Let me pull up the chat. All right, I'm gonna mute the mic. If you guys got any questions, drop it in the chat. This looks like a pretty good video. I'm gonna play it now.
To this Atslander presentation, Cholula, Mesoamerica's Eternal City, with Dr. John M.D. Pohl of California State University. Take it away, John.
All right. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm excited to have an opportunity to come back and revisit some of these developments in Mesoamerican archaeology that are transcend and move beyond just simply Aztecs and Mayas, and particularly focusing on this middle post-classic period, essentially between about 1300, 1450, and so forth. And Cholula, as all of us are beginning to realize, played an essential role, not just in terms of its domination of the Puebla Plain at this time, but actually, I would argue, across Mesoamerica. So Cholula is located in the center of the plain of Puebla. It's surrounded by these volcanoes, Popocatépetl, Iztaccíhuatl, Malinche, and then just to the south, Orizaba. So it's a heavily volcanic active area. Here's a vista across the city of Cholula at Popocatépetl. The city itself has an estimated population of 300,000, and it's divided into it has a division of two, and this is this is due to an historical, and actually even a pre-Columbian division. So today you would know it as having two names, San Pedro Cholula and San Andres Cholula. And then in addition to this, it has a number of barrios that are divided within these divisions. Many of these churches, for example, and much of the population is living on top of what we presume, and there's plenty of archaeological evidence for this, would have been the barrios that were here in pre-Hispanic times as well. So today we're going to be focusing on the central ceremonial area, as it would have been both today and in pre-Columbian times. We're going to be looking at the Great Pyramid, which you see in the lower right-hand corner, and then the Church of San Gabriel and the Church of San Miguel, and the main plaza, which you see in the upper left-hand corner. So the Great Pyramid it's estimated to have a base of about 400 meters and a height of 65 meters, making it one of the largest human constructions on Earth. At the time in the early colonial period, there were a number of histories and both creation stories with their mythic elements, as well as population histories referring to how the city was constructed and how it developed and the cults that developed there. One of the stories referred to this Great Pyramid because of its tremendous size as having been constructed by giants. And this isn't uncommon. We see this in civilizations all around the world with the idea of the Cyclops, for example, in Greek myth, constructing Bronze Age citadels and things of this nature. So here we have an account of the Great Pyramid having been constructed by a culture hero named Shelwa, who is a mythical giant on the one hand, but actually an historical figure on the other. And we find this quite a bit in these creation stories for Puebla and Oaxaca as a sharing of both supernatural and human traits. In fact, there seemed to be artifactual evidence for such a thing, at least to the Dominican friars who were working in the area. Pedro de los Rios, for example, claimed that he had the opportunity to examine a molar tooth from the jaw of one of these giants. But, and this has been used by a program which is on Netflix called Ancient Apocalypse, by Grant Hancock, which focuses on Cholula and features Joe Rogan among other guests to try to explain that in fact this is evidence of, and he uses this around the world with archaeological sites to suggest that there were earlier civilizations dating back as far as 20,000. I subscribe personally more to proposals by Leonardo Lopez Lujan that what Padre Rios is actually looking at are the remains of mammoths. So in all likelihood, Shelwa is actually a mammoth. The first archaeological reports and investigations of Cholula go back to Alexander von Humboldt in 1803 and Guillermo Dupé at about the same time. I'm not going to go into a lot of the other details of people who had done research here. I want to move forward to a major archaeological project that was conducted by Ignacio Marquina between 1931 and 1971 that essentially, and this is where all of the famous tunnels come from, that essentially defined for the first time a number of building stages and a chronological sequence for construction of the Great Pyramid, for example. So the reevaluation of the chronology that has been performed by Patricia Plunkett and Gabriela Uruñuela has facilitated some interesting developments that I find very interesting in understanding the site historically. So I'm not going to go into a lot of the formative and early classic period, but I do want to highlight a few things. One of the earliest structures is has always been known as the Edificios de los Chapulines, but whether they're really grasshoppers, but in fact skulls is debated. It's considered to be late pre-classic. And here we have a photograph of Gabriela Uruñuela, the INA archaeologist responsible for carrying out over 30 years of investigation at the site. She gave me a tour of the site and of the Great Pyramid and allowed me to photograph some of the original murals. Over the course of development, we start to see an expansion of and an encasement of the Chapulines pyramid through these different extensions until ultimately, by the early classic, it's a bit mysterious as to what we're actually looking at as this structure, but there's no question about the fact that it has a tremendous size at this point and seems to William Sanders even suggested that there was a rivalry going on at this point between Teotihuacan and Cholula. And we start to see, of course, some shared architectural patterns with this. The Pyramid of the Moon, for example, together with this platform and staircase that was constructed in the early classic at the Great Pyramid. So the early classic, Teotihuacan, as we know, wraps up by about 550. Some people would push it up to 600. Cholula, likewise, it seems to hang on a little longer, perhaps another 50 years, 100 years. But for the most part, with the Patricia Plunkett and Gabriela Uruñuela chronology, together with Michael Lind doing the post-classic, we have a bit of a conundrum, and the conundrum is that there doesn't appear to be any late classic at the site. They interpret this significantly in terms of the evidence for a number of volcanic eruptions coming from Popocatépetl that were literally covering Cholula in ash at this point and making it uninhabitable. And so even today, here's an ash event at Cholula from 2023. This is something that occurs with some frequency historically through modern times. So their proposal is that at the outset of this early classic period, at the outset of the late classic period and extending across this period of time, Popocatépetl creates these events or fosters these events, causing the population to move out of Cholula and during Jeff's presentation, there were questions about, well, what about Kakashla? So Gabriella and Patricia then proposed that this is the opportunity that Kakashla has to then expand. And so it's only located 20 miles north of Cholula. So we then see this extraordinary fluorescence of classic Maya art and architecture coming in with this expansion at both Kakashla and the adjacent site of Xochitecat, which then dominates the region between 650 and 900. Now, as you saw in Andrew Turner's presentation, he's made the proposal that, in fact, this is a situation in which the archaeological sites, the alliance system of the Upper Usumacinta, is actually taking a direct hand on the plain of Puebla, using this these particular volcanic events, the reorganization of the population, to establish Kakashla then as a regional trading center. And of course, this is evidenced by the emphasis in the murals, with an emphasis on the Maya merchant god El, for example, and this theme of what I refer to as Tamawanchan or Tlalocan, this paradise. Tamawanchan, in fact, is a Maya term meaning place of mist, or also place of the Moan bird, as well as Xochitecat with its remarkable association with these figurines that appear to portray flower goddesses, obviously anticipating, as Bodo Sprans, one of the excavators, proposed, was the beginnings, the foundation of the cult of Xochiquetzal, a significant deity we're going to be talking more about. Well, with the collapse of these Upper Usumacinta sites, such as Yaxchilan, we actually see then a return to Cholula, not surprisingly, at the end of the Classic. And this opens up a new sort of epiclassic fluorescence at Cholula. And I would argue then that it's the cult at Kakashla that is then transferred to Cholula. And I went into this in my first Auslander presentation about a year and a half ago. So we're going to start to see then the fluorescence and the epiclassic into the early post-classic and late post-classic, certainly of a Xochiquetzal cult here, together with this emphasis on a Tamawanchan or flower world, as well as Tlalocan, the two paradises are associated with the Great Pyramid, which it then becomes a natural landscape feature. Now, in other presentations, I've emphasized the fact that Cholula it's documented stratigraphically that is responsible for the reintroduction of the polychrome tradition on the plain of Puebla, inherited from this classic Maya background. So the Kakashla murals and architecture on the one hand, and this polychrome tradition on the other. John Paddock had originally, back in the 60s, proposed that Cholula polychrome has its origins with Maya polychrome. But if we look at this, then what's really kind of going on with the Maya world? Well, we know that Copan had been a gateway and probably had a tremendous amount of influence and represented the interface between Central America and the classic Maya kingdoms. What's so fascinating to me is that as much as we see so much of the classic Maya tradition in Copan's art and architecture, they're actually in their residential areas, particularly among the subordinate class, are using Central American ceramics. And even they even have recovered Costa Rican style metates. So I find this fascinating, and it's used by David Webster and other experts on this on Copan to emphasize that Copan is actually deeply invested in Central America. But of course, at this time, we also have the Cotzamalahuapa tradition on the Guatemala coast extending into Chiapas. But by this time, by the end of the Classic, these are gone. Their influence is gone. And at this epiclassic crossroads, this juxtaposition in time, This is when we see not only the foundation of the polychrome tradition emerging at Cholula, but now a direct interaction between Cholula through the Tehuacan Valley, through Chiapas, down through coastal Guatemala into El Salvador and Nicaragua. So we can kind of follow with Michael Lynn's chronology that he's developed and the phases he's developed for the early post-classic, epi-classic through early post-classic to late post-classic. We have this Akiawak phase. Then we move into a Tacoma phase between 1150 to 1350, and of course at this time it's a contemporary of Tula, the Toltec capital north of the Valley of Mexico. But I would emphasize then that we actually start to see this is the period when we see the most intense interaction between Central America and Cholula, just in terms of the emulation that's going on, the use of abstract style, symbols, things of this nature. So it has a Maya, classic Maya background to it as a phenomena. And obviously Copan was very interested in Central American polychrome. But Cholula is definitely, now we start to see a sharing of themes and ritualism. So in fact, writers discuss the movement of populations, Nahua populations, doubtless based from in the plain of Puebla. Motolania, for example, said at a time of great deprivation, many were driven by necessity to leave. For it is known that a great number of canoes or boats went by way of the South Sea and landed in Nicaragua, which is more than 350 leagues from Mexico. They made war upon the natives who were settled there and defeated them and overthrew their power. The invading Nahuas remained and settled there. Many people were surprised to see that Nicaragua is populated by Nahuas who speak the same language as the Mexicans today. So this is all reflected, particularly in this later period, the late post-classic, 1350 up into the colonial period, 1550. And by this time, then, we're seeing the consolidation, the use of the Nahua Mixteca style. I use the term Nahua Mixteca because we're referring to the actual people who invented the style. I've set aside this term Mixteca Puebla as just simply being an abstract term that is geographical and has no reference to the actual people. And it's at this time then we start to see the adoption, and that's what I'm going to be addressing more of today, the adoption of this style by all of these other major cultural co-tradition areas across Mesoamerica, from Mayapan, for example, to Iximche, Highland Guatemala, the Highland Guatemala kingdoms, the Quiche and the Cachiquel, the surrounding kingdoms of the plain of Puebla, represented and sharing themes such as this Tzitzimi theme we see on mesas between Iximche, for example, and Tizatlan and Tlaxcala, to even the format of the creation stories. We have these famous paintings at Tulum that show the descent of gods on ropes that are clearly associated with these creation stories as they appear at the Mitla, in the Mitla frescoes, and are in fact cognate with the Mixtec codices, creation stories. And then to the north, we see the polychrome tradition being used to advocate connections between all of these groups, between West Mexico to northern Mexico to the American Southwest. But at the same time, as much as they share many themes and even some of the iconography, they also have their own particular way, their own regional developments. And so it's at this point then, when we start to ask what's really explaining this, I'm simply just arguing that it's Cholula, but it's a Cholula that is operating in terms of a multi-centric universe, not a Cholula as a militarily dominant or centralized dominant place, as we're so used to thinking about Tenochtitlan or Teotihuacan or even major Maya kingdoms such as Tikal or Palenque. This is where the idea of a Vatican or a Mecca is going to kick in here. All right, so Tenochtitlan then actually, I would argue, co-opts this system, and Aztec sculpture is I think it's actually a Maya, an effort on the part of the Valley of Mexico, Nahuas, the Western Nahuas, to begin to advocate for divine kingship and monument building, architectural programs that emulate what the classic Maya had done. But by doing it using the system that was actually in place, that is in the small portable art with the polychrome and small objects in gold, silver, jewels, and things of this nature. But then it all comes back again. I'd argue that although the viceroyalty is actually dominating the region out of Mexico City, Cholula now and its associates come back and actually the colonial interaction and the production of lienzos and paintings and histories by all of these people that emphasize Cholula is a testament to this. Okay, so using that as a background, I kind of want to talk about a kind of direct historical analysis of Cholula from this perspective and cast a wider geographical importance to it. So some of the primary sources we have are the Relación de Cholula in the Benson Library at UT, the Mapas de Cuauhtinchan, the Historia Tolteca Chichimeca, and Diego Duran, his Historia Relación de los Ritos y Sacrificios. Much of this region was actually evangelized by the Franciscans, particularly the first, the so-called 12 disciples, the first Franciscans who were assigned to the region to work with and begin to develop an incorporation of the kingdoms of the Puebla Valley, which you see more in the upper right-hand corner here, together with an extension down into the Tehuacan Valley, with Cholula being a primary focus, together with two ranking kingdoms, Tlaxcala and Huexotzinco. Now, this region is unique because particularly in the kingdom of Cuauhtinchan, which was part of this system, we don't actually see anything in their histories about the Aztec Empire at all. There are a few references to the Aztecs in the Historia Tolteca Chichimeca, but their maps, for example, such as Mapa de Cuauhtinchan II, all of these were actually sponsored by Don Alonso de Castañeda, cacique of Cuauhtinchan, but you would never know the Aztec Empire ever existed according to these histories. And this is what fascinates me and has always fascinated me, because that's what I work with, are confederacies of southern Mexico. And together with the Historia Tolteca Chichimeca, and you see in this page, for example, representation as the people of the late post-classic and early colonial period really understood the Great Pyramid. So it's at this time then that I would start to emphasize that we have this Olmeca Xicalonca, or what the transition between what Gabriela and Patricia would argue is a transition between the Nestle, which means ash, and this Kiawak phase. So Motolanía says that Cholutecas began an extremely large temple with the intention of making it higher than the highest mountains of the land. At the present day, the building is so remarkable that if it were not apparent that the structure is of clay and adobe, no one would believe it was not a small mountain. And of course, a lot of what we're seeing here, this construction, would be due to this Olmeca Xicalonca group. Isla Xochitl talks about them with regard to Cholula. He says those that inhabited this land during the Third Age were the Olmecas and Xicaloncas, and according to their own histories, they came to Potonchan in ships or boats from the east. From there, they went out to settle on the banks of the Toyac River, which flows from Cholula. So it's in this transitional phase from late classic and early post-classic that we start to see these influences. There may be, in fact, earlier influences and connections between Cholula and Veracruz. We see, for example, in these monuments that were excavated by Marquina, a close association in the scroll work with Veracruz polychrome, for example. There's also the site of Comalcalco, which is a classic Maya site, and many people consider it to be within the sphere of Palenque's influence in Tabasco. But what I find fascinating is that people often ask about Cholula and the use of adobe to construct the shell over the earlier constructions of the Great Pyramid. But in fact, at Comalcalco, that's exactly what they're doing. They're just simply using clay. It's a hard fire, more of a brick, and then they're just applying stucco to the actual exterior of it. So, in terms of this construction and why we don't see more masonry at Cholula, I think there's a lot to be explained in a construction technique of that nature. As they perished, one of the accounts of Cholula, as they perished in their mad attempt, God confounded them as he did the builders of the Tower of Babel, causing a great stone shaped like a toad to fall there during a terrible storm which struck the place. From that time, they ceased to work upon the temple. And in fact, there is evidence at different periods of time of probably internal factionalism in the destruction of monuments and the architecture itself. So that by the time we get into this early post-classic period, I would suggest probably that the Great Pyramid, which is shown here in the Historia Tolteca Chichimeca in a diagram of the central plaza and the main ceremonial precinct, that the Great Pyramid is much by 1,000 as much as it appears today. That's what they suggest in their histories. So here we have the representation of the Great Pyramid with the toad and with a legacy, a knowledge of continued construction, integrating buildings and structures into this natural landscape feature of an artificial mountain or man-made mountain at the same time. On the right, you see the symbol for Cholula is Tula, the new Tula, with the transfer of this power from Tula to Cholula as the new Tula. So essentially then there is evidence of an adobe superstructure enlargement during this period, but discussions as to what the pyramid looked like, I'm not all that concerned about it. I'm much more interested in the concept of this as a natural landscape feature. I see evidence for this, and in fact, an intention in planning this with this idea of transferring the cult from Cacaxtla and Xochitecat to the Great Pyramid itself. So that I'm expanding this out, but there's no question of the fact that when you go up the staircase at Cacaxtla into the main plaza where the battle murals are, you are literally walking up through this the experience of a natural environment. This Tamuanchan, Tlalocan, is a constructed landscape feature. So I would suggest that the Olmeca Xicalonca and certainly the concept of the Great Pyramid afterwards is inspired by this idea of a natural environment with these constructions, other structures built in and around it. And I'll come back and talk a little bit more about this as an aesthetic at the end of my talk. Now, one thing that's quite interesting is the identification of a structure there called the palace. It is identified as a palace of the Olmeca Xicalonca ruler at Cholula, presumably in this early post-classic period. And Jeff, others have suggested that this is in fact what's represented by an actual structure that was originally identified by Eduardo Noguera, and with his not only his excavation of some of the surrounding patio area, but actually an altar of the carved skulls, as it's called. What interests me particularly is the recovery of a drinking vessel that portrays a specific figure on it. It has horns on its head. It has a particular type of pectoral, kind of oval pectoral. I'll be talking about more in a minute. This is in fact a figure that appears on the Tacoma period polychrome, and I've talked about this a lot in my first lecture for Auslander back in January 2025, so I'm not going to belabor it here. but I've emphasized the fact that this is a cult, a particular cult, especially dedicated to God M, who Mayanists, going back to Mike Coe, first proposed that essentially God M replaces God L as the patron Maya deity of merchants. And here's the if you're interested in it, the Oslander talk that can be seen on YouTube. And then I went on to propose, using historical sources as well, which we're going to talk a little bit about, this idea that the bowls, the polychrome itself, is an artifactual manifestation of a rotational power system through competitive fee sponsorship among these merchant families. All right, now we need to talk about another component, and that component is Tula and the Tolteca Chichimeca. Because although we have this Olmeca Xicalonca phase and this manifestation in the area, we have also to deal with, I don't think they were rivals, but we have Tula, the Toltec capital, on the frontier of West Mexico in the northwest of the Valley of Mexico. The term Tula just simply refers to a place of cattails, and the idea of where these cattail plants grow is particularly in desert regions. These are oases. This is an oasis, a place of water, habitation. Even the tule plant itself is said by southwestern tribes to be, particularly among the migratory tribes like the Apache, to be what is to them, the migratory people, what corn is to the settled people. So here's an image, of course, of Pyramid B at Tula. And we have this concept of Cholula as the new Tula or Tolan. Now, there is another major structure we need to discuss, which is and it's shown on the map from the Historia Tolteca Chichimeca, and that is the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. And here's a detail of it. You can see that it's double chambered, and it's dedicated to, and I'm using some of the colonial imagery here because it's at the same time as these maps and the Historia were actually created. So on the left, you see an image from Diego Duran of Quetzalcoatl as the wind god with his buccal mask, which is supposed to represent a particular duck or bird. And then also the historical Quetzalcoatl, a similar situation we had with Xelwa as Topiltzin, the founder of Tula Hidalgo. So the establishment then, we have two major ritual areas that although when you visit Cholula today, you're essentially in a colonial to historical world. That pre-Columbian world, that late post-classic world is just right under your feet. Here's an artist's reconstruction of the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. It was reported to have been actually by Bernal Diaz to have been larger than the Templo Mayor. So estimating that Eduardo Matos's proposal, the Templo Mayor, was 150 feet high. It's a possibility. It's not there, of course, but we're going to find out what happened to it. Actually, it is still there. It's just something new. All right, so with this Olmeca Xicalonca phase, we now have joined to it this Tula phase or Toltec phase with the cult from the Temple of the Warriors, from Tula itself, having been transferred through histories that are well detailed in something as readily available to us as the Florentine Codex, for example, in which it's explained that Quetzalcoatl had constructed Tula. He was the founder of Tula, but that he had fallen and that he was the high priest there. But he had fallen to the wages of sin, to the temptations of two sorcerers. One was Tezcatlipoca, and his associate, his compadre, was Huitzilopochtli. These, of course, are the founders of the kingdoms of the Western now, as the Valley of Mexico. They had, among other things, had induced Quetzalcoatl to drunkenness. And here we see him passing out. in the images that were created by Sahagun's four Nawa associates who did the paintings, and you can see him humiliating himself before the Toltec people. Now, although this is considered to be myth, there is in fact considerable evidence that Tula did fall. It certainly seemed to have been abandoned by about 1150 to 1175. And not only that, but the columns at Pyramid B, for example, in the left-hand corner, you see a colossal head that has been split in half. I mean, the amount of energy it took to dismantle this pyramid, and even the amount of heat and water that would have been applied to break a basalt monumental column like this is astounding. So whoever was here, and the myth is about internal factionalism, clearly. An enormous amount of energy went into destroying the site. And interestingly, the people of the Valley of Puebla suggested that there was possibly a climatic event. We talked about this with Jonathan's talk and with Jeff's talk as well about this these colossal destructions that took place. And this was the fall of Tula was supposed to have taken place, according to the Puebla histories, during a fourth age. In other words, the age that just came before ours, in which the destruction of Tula took place, destroyed on account of the vices of the inhabitants, obviously reference to what got Quetzalcoatl in trouble. And as a consequence, a very severe famine befell them, and the province was destroyed. They add, moreover, that it rained blood, and many died of terror. Well, these are in fact what the stories that are being told on the Puebla documents, such as the Mapa de Coatinchan. So it as much as it doesn't have any, you would never know the Aztec Empire existed. It sure knows that Tula existed. And in fact, the entire rationale for the founding of these kingdoms across the plain of Puebla and Cholula especially is well illustrated in this, from the first emergence of the Chichimeca from Chicamostoc, which we see illustrated here, to the 7 tribes being led by Mixcoatl, the father of Quetzalcoatl. The journey is the migration is sort of couched as a kind of major deer hunt, a ritual deer hunt, which is going to be significant, that I'll talk about in a minute. So from Chicamostoc, they go to Tula on the map, and then eventually from Tula, led by Quetzalcoatl. There may actually be a number of migrations, Quetzalcoatl possibly leaving as early as 950, 1000, and then a severe internal disputes of Tula that some 50 to 100 years later that lead to increasing populations. But nevertheless, as a creation story, this is all kind of put together as then the rationale for the founding of Cholula as the new Tula. Now, when the Tolteca Chichimeca arrived in Tula, they encountered the Olmeca-Xicalonca, and there was both antagonism between the two groups and an alliance. And among the rituals that were engaged with forming an alliance to construct the city of Cholula is the awarding of this nose ornament that would make one a tecutli. It's a Nahuatl term for a lineage head. It's called the Yakashiwit, or nose turquoise. And so we see in the Historia Tolteca Chichimeca, the Tolteca Chichimeca being made through this ritual, probably an Olmeca-Xicalonca ritual, part of this new aristocracy in which the Tetecutin become the major landholders, and then the establishment. This concept of the Tecutli, I think, is absolutely fundamental to understanding the Middle Post-Classic, the pre-Aztec period. Now, the Relación de Cholula, again, it's in the Benson Library, talks about this and says the high priest had the power to confirm in the states all the governors and kings of this new Spain, that such kings and chieftains, upon inheriting a kingdom or lordship, came to this city to acknowledge obedience to its idol, Quetzalcoatl. So power here isn't by military conquest. Power here is through a buy-in, an investment in this cult of Quetzalcoatl. And this, of course, leads to the foundation of these two divisions, the Tolteca Chichimeca and the Olmeca Xicolaca dominance of the city. And then also, as we saw with the account of the Tower of Babel analogy, in fact, that's actually true. There were at least three different languages spoken in the immediate region, Nahuatl, Chontal, and Popoloca, and at least 15 other languages that are spoken within 300 miles of Cholula and the plain of Puebla. So this is the confederacy then that formulates in the late post-classic out of this, the Eastern Nahuas. And the Mapas are careful to point out that they then move into the Tehuacan Valley and ultimately end up settling. The Nahua populations intermarry with Mixtec populations and establish the kingdom, particularly kingdoms in the Cuixtlahuaca Valley. This then is the basis for the concept of this confederacy that existed across the late post-classic, who identified themselves as the children of Quetzalcoatl. So the natives of Cholula continue their trade and commence traveling through the most remote parts of the land, from Soconusco to Guatemala, with their loads of goods, just as they did in ancient times. This is from Diego Duran. In fact, I find it fascinating that the Cuauhtinchan maps there were several that were constructed. Map number 1 actually portrays this. Rather than featuring Chicamostoc and Tula and this Toltec background, it just simply documents exactly what we're talking about at the outset of the post-classic or in the epi-classic period, the opening up of this direct line of communication into Central America. The map features Cholula as a ceremonial center at the base. And then in the upper right-hand corner, here's a detail of it, presumed to be the temple of, there's Tlachihualtepet, for example, the temple of Quetzalcoatl. And then the migration of the Tolteca Chichimeca ends on the Pacific coast. Here's a detail of two coastlines. We still debate whether there is a deer, for example, here. Maybe it's Mazatlan on the coast of Chiapas, and then a further site further down, which may actually extend into Escuintla and beyond. What interests me, however, is some of the ritualism involved here. The leaders of this expedition on Cuauhtinchan map number 1 have a very specific appearance. They're not the standard sort of hair shirt chichimecs, as you can see. These, in fact, are men that feature the attributes, the tied hairstyle called a tamilote, a specific type of face painting, these black squares, that was said to have been made by grinding up a pyrite powder and making a paint of it. And then the blue net cloth, either worn as a kilt here, or as we see in the identification of what these gods are, these leaders are, it's Yakashiwit, the vanguard lord, the patron god of merchants. And I was fortunate a few years ago to actually find a Cholula vase that portrays the face of Yakatecutli as we see it portrayed. Here he is, instead of just the kilt, he's wearing the cloak as well, together with the tamilote hairstyle. So this it fascinates me because it suggests that, and this is something I'd written about extensively, was that these so-called Chichimec migrations are actually mapping the exchange system, the trade system. This is the plain of Puebla's investment, mapped as a creation story, as a migration story, mapped as the trade system, the trading system. It's no accident that the leaders of the Tolteca Chichimeca, rather than being Quetzalcoatl and Mixcoatl, are actually two vanguard merchants. Now, there's another aspect of this that you probably recognize more, and we generally tend to think of Yakatecutli as having another title. His name is Nose Lord, not just Vanguard Lord, but Nose Lord. And in this guise, he has more of these clown attributes that I discussed with regard to God M and Ekchua the East Liltone, the Nawa clown scribe god, in the talk that I had given previously. We know that this is a guise or an avatar of Yakatecutli as a merchant, as a vanguard merchant. Because of his nose, if you look at his nose, we can see that nose is actually a glyph. If you look up on colonial manuscripts that display the property of individuals, in this case, an individual who owns property, a Nawa individual, he has the name Yakat, Pei Yakat, and his glyph is actually this turned up pointed nose that you can see here. So there's no question about the fact that this is also Yakatecutli. But what's important is that he's also portrayed as this kind of buffoon or clown in this regard, something that Carl Taub has discussed quite a bit with a seminal paper on this. And then we've all kind of gone on to connect this with merchants and also with sorcery as well. Here's a famous mask. This is being studied by Davide Domenici currently. Right now, he's preparing an article on it. It's located in the Museo della Civitia in Rome, the civil museum in Rome, and it's generally thought to portray Yakatecutli. But what's so fascinating about it is that it makes a clear link between Yakatecutli and God M or Ekchua. So there's no question about here a kind of an integration between a Nawa merchant deity and, of course, the Maya merchant deity. Now, Ekchua or these Yakatecutli figure prominently in these jewels and gems. You're all familiar with them. The one in the lower left-hand corner is especially famous. It's in the collections at Dumbarton Oaks. The silver one was actually excavated at the Templo Mayor. Recently, there's been quite a lot of attention that's been focused on these interesting rings. They're copper rings, and they're from the early post-classic. And some people have suggested they represent Tlaloc because he had rings around his eyes. But in fact, on closer examination, we know that these rings are the rings that we see of the face paint on these clowns, even up to East Liltone, for example, who's known as ash face or ash eyes, ash face, ash mouth, terms that are actually applied to clowns in the American Southwest as well. So this idea of the rings around the eyes and the mouth extends to the buffoons and clowns of Xenoconton. So these rings have fascinated people because they seem to represent at the beginnings of the introduction of metallurgy into Mesoamerica. They seem to represent some kind of broad concept. And the very fact that they actually portray merchant or merchant-related deities has become very attractive to people who are working on this. So I would suggest, I know I'm kind of sticking my neck out here, but I would suggest that this is because we're seeing an early post-classic manifestation of Cholula through the use of a particular medium, metals, with the exchange and expeditionary trade across Mesoamerica, even in the early post-classic, because frankly, this is exactly what is the center, the focus of the cult in Cholula itself during this early post-classic period. All right, now scholars that have been working on this, the first person to kind of work on this most recently was Elizabeth Paris, who wrote an article on the possibility that these rings represent guilds, and that's fine. It's a possibility, I guess, but whatever a guild is. But the more recently, Laura Solar Valverde and Kenneth Hirth have revitalized the Pochteca idea. Now, for me, this is both of these proposals are a little dicey. For one thing, we've been around the block on the Pochteca hypothesis once before. with with Charles de Peso. And when Charles de Peso first proposed that the exotic goods that are found at Casas Grandes, for example, in Chihuahua, are in fact the result of Pochteca operating out of Tula all the way to Casas Grandes, created quite a sensation, as all of you know, and in fact led to both Mesoamerican archaeologists and Southwestern archaeologists severely damaging Charles de Peso's reputation over this. I have issues with it as well. It seems like, and I've been dealing with this through my entire career. It seems like my colleagues who want to work on economy and post-classic economy, run to the Florentine Codex or Codex Mendoza and immediately declare that, well, this is how the economy worked. It was either militarism and tribute economy, or it had to do with this class, a specific class of merchants known as the Pochteca. We have to remember, however, that this Aztec system, as much as it's appealing to us, because it sounds like any other ancient civilization we have historical sources for, the marketplace and conquest of ancient Rome, or the hegemonic empire of Athens, or something of that nature. But this is a very highly ranked and these are highly stratified societies. And we're not really dealing with that across southern Mexico, or in fact, I'd even argue most of Mesoamerica. This is all predicated, of course, on conquest and tribute wealth, as we see it in the Mendoza Codex as well. I would suggest then that let's take a little more closer look at this. The people of southern Mexico are especially well known not for monument building. There are very, very few monuments from southern Mexico, but the emphasis on works of small portable art. So, given this kind of background, all the way back to the introduction of metallurgy into Mesoamerica with the copper rings, we see the foundation for a proliferation of all of this jewelry and ornamentation. In a recent article that I published with Reassessing the Aztlan World, edited with Mike Mathiewicz, I proposed that these gems and jewels are actually symbols of contracts between Tetacutin, or between nobles. And in the case of Oaxaca, they're actually oracular priests. They represent in their own way an extension, a Oaxaca manifestation of the Cholula cult. Here's one, for example. It's an earring that represents Yacatecutli. Codex Vienna documents how naming, the exchange of names between people, is done by ear piercing. So in fact, we see it as just a piece of jewelry, but in fact, it actually represents a significant ritual of exchange, in this case, in which our Quetzalcoatl, the Mixtec Quetzalcoatl, nine wind is piercing the ear of Two Dog, and Two Dog then reciprocates by piercing the ear of Nine Wind to receive an ear ornament. This is a very common promotion. It's the construction of a compadre system, essentially, in the Southwest, for example. Mike Mathiewicz has gone on to examine these gold pectorals, which appear on, they're all over the Mixtec codices, but are only real pre-Columbian histories, but also in these polychrome vases and plates that we see from West Mexico. Here's a culture hero who's wearing one of these gold pectorals. Mike Mathiewicz makes the argument that, in fact, this is the antecedent to a very important object. It's a mirror that represents, together with the ornamental bowls, the bead bowls, represent offices, cargo holding offices for the Huichol, or the Huichiaritari, for their peregrinations into Wirikuta, the place of the sun, in San Luis Potosí. This I find fascinating because, and I argued this years ago, that in fact what we're seeing is, with this allegory of the deer hunt and the association of the deer with the peyote is exactly what you're seeing on the Mapas de Quotinchan. So these Mapas de Quotinchan also highlight this deer hunt aspect of this, and there are accounts that refer to the deer's trail as actually being the road to Tula. So that, together with Quotinchan map number 1, that shows that they're actually being led by merchants, I think kind of nails it here. So what we're really looking at is something that involved, we're not looking at Pochteca, we're not looking at a separate class of people here. And in terms of guilds, yes, maybe guilds within a city like Tenochtitlan, but these are small petty kingdoms, decentralized peer polities that we're dealing with, that we're seeing portrayed in across Mesoamerica at this time. Now, probably the most famous pre-Columbian image of a ritual exchange is the Yakashiwit, or nose turquoise, as it's portrayed in Codex Nuttall. And you can see here 8 Deer getting his nose ornament and his nose pierced by, he's actually a Nahua representative in the Cuixtlahuaca area, northern Oaxaca, that 8 Deer appeals to for authority. And I've argued in my dissertation that this is a form of fictive kinship. So essentially, rather than emphasizing Pochteca or these guilds, I think it all is related to this whole concept of the Tedecutin. These are corporate lineage organizations. They're rotational power structures. Power is shared and moved between these families. And then these creation stories and pilgrimages are actually the basis for conceptually mapping their entire system of expeditionary trade and rationalizing it. So the big question, of course, is where did 8 Deer get his nose ornament? And people who work on Cholula always put in an image of 8 Deer and tell everybody that 8 Deer got his nose ornament at Cholula, but this is wrong. Those of us who have spent decades working on the Mixtec codices, and I can only think of one person, and for particular reasons that have to do with his argument for a national Mixtec history. All of us agree that, in fact, 8 Deer does not go to Cholula, and there are some important points to emphasize about this that have to do with how Cholula, this relates to this idea of a Vatican or a Mecca, how Cholula affects or is able to influence these other regions. What's the buy-in? And I think that's what the message in the 8 Deer story. So in Quotinchan map number 1, we started out at Chicamostoc, we go to Tula, we migrate to Cholula, and then in the lower right-hand corner, you actually see a major part of the Mixtec region. It's the Cuixtlahuaca kingdom of Oaxaca. And so they're incorporating this into this larger sphere, even though essentially these are Mixtecs. So this connection, particularly between Tehuacan and Cuixtlahuaca, is emphasized on these. Now, if we look at, actually, it's kind of a phony. It was painted in 1545 in the colonial period, but was used in a court case to try to suggest Mixtec caciques connection with the ancestral power of the culture hero 8 Deer. And if we look at the same story, the cognate story that you see in Nuttall, you can see that 8 Deer here on the left is being approached by an impersonator of Quetzalcoatl, and that he and his 4 associates have journeyed from Tula to go to 8 Deer. 8 Deer then gets his nose ornament. You can see Lord Four Jaguar piercing his nose and giving him the award. And then this idea of a fictive kinship term, I think, is very interesting, because then we see sort of the Mixtec equivalent to this term, which is actual marriage. In return, 8 Deer's daughter and son are given by 8 Deer to Tula, where they actually marry each other and establish a Tula family. Now, the idea that this is going on in Cholula, just because of other details and things, has never made a lot of sense to us. And in fact, it's the colonial documents that prove conclusively that what the Mixtecs are using is their own Tula. They have their own Tula that they're invested in.
Yeah, that was like a tomato sauce.
Yeah. So here we see, for example, a lienzo. It's part of the tradition of the Mapas de Cotinchan. It was actually produced in Cuixtlahuaca, and they're huge, and they're obviously used for the entire groups of nobles to consult their land holdings and their genealogies. Cholula is portrayed on this. This is what it looks like. They're distinguishing it because to them, to the Mixtecs, Cholula is Chololan, which is the Nahua term to flee or run. And the Relación de Cholula explains that this is the name that it's understood by when they portrayed how the locals, the Cholulteca, fled from Tlachihualtepet, the man-made hill, when it was cursed by the toad and the rain god. Tula appears on the lienzo and in all of the associated Cuixtlahuaca documents. There are between 5 and 10 of them. So here's the place sign on the same document, the lienzo de Tepiltepec, of Tula. This is the Tula that Atir gets his nose ornament at. Now, what about this? What is this connection then? We obviously have a local phenomena. It's a local phenomena that emulates the Tula ritual. Documents from Puebla actually kind of illustrate what's going on here. And what it is a kind of a transference of power, through emulation, but official emulation. For example, Codex Rios or Codex Vaticanus tells us a story about how Quetzalcoatl and Xipe Totec were worshipped at Tula. They then led their people, presumably obviously through Cholula, but what was most important was their efforts or their success at miracle working. As they moved through the Puebla area and into Oaxaca, they were confronted with a insurmountable mountain system, Sierra system that they couldn't penetrate. So it was Xipe Totec that actually caused the opening of a cave, tunnel, a passageway through this mountain range so that the Nahuas could continue. And then ultimately, of course, they will settle Cuixtlahuaca and intermarry with the Mixtecs there to establish a Tolteca Chichimeca Mixtec dynasty. This is a real place. It's been identified. A number of us have published on this. Javier Orcid, and a number of the colleagues. This has been of tremendous interest to us. It's been identified as a natural bridge or tunnel that exists through the solid rock in this region. It's located just to the south of the Tehuacan Valley and south of Cholula at this location. You can just barely see the other entrance. The Lienzo de Tlaquiltepec actually identifies this as Chicamostoc. So the Puebla documents do have some big geography in it, but the Cuixtlahuaca documents use the Puebla documents as a template, but it's localized. They localize it. We start to see the same thing with the ritualism between the two traditions as well. What about Quetzalcoatl and Xipe Totec? Well, Codex Vienna doesn't talk anything about these two guys coming to them and setting them up. No, their version of Quetzalcoatl is Nine Wind, and they say he was actually born from a flint in Achiutla, a kingdom in the Mixteca Alta. And from Achiutla, he then rose into the sky, and he was given the ritual dress of Quetzalcoatl. So he's a local boy who makes good, and through a divine in the heavens by two elders, he's given the divine ritual dress. He's become he is the Ashipla in a sense, and he's now been becoming the god himself. And so the Codex Vienna then goes on to show how Nine Wind, now as Quetzalcoatl, as a local Quetzalcoatl, descends on ropes and then raises the sky from the earth to reveal the Mixtec landscape for the first time. So does everybody see what's going on here? This is a very interesting and very clever, ingenious strategy on the part of a closely affiliated group. In fact, they're intermarried with each other. I mean, we have numerous documents that there are Mixtec populations living all across the kingdoms of the Plain of Puebla, and there are Nahua communities across Oaxaca. So what I've done here is that was just one example, and in fact, in another lecture, I can go into this in much more detail. We see all the different so-called pantheon of, quote, Aztec gods, but in fact, they're not. These are all local boys and girls, local men and women, who have all been, and these probably are traditions that go back into the classic that have been reconfigured with the Cholula cult to be reorganized. And in fact, there are the two classic capitals in the Nochislan Valley for the Mixtecs bear the attributes of, they're called Yucunyudawi and Yucuita, but they are Tamawanchan and Tlalocan. One's the rain mountain, rain god mountain, the other's the flower mountain. So to kind of wrap it up here a bit, I just want to kind of talk about the religious cult itself, because this is so important for those of us understanding what's really going on here with Oaxaca during this period. They are part of the Cholula cult, but we see, and this is in my conclusions, I'll talk about other regions of Oaxaca, but we can document for the first time how the cult is actually absorbed and then reapplied to local phenomena. All right, so what is this cult? If that's what we have, what is this cult? It's obviously not the Central Valley of Mexico cult of Huitzilopochtli and Tezcatlipoca. It's something very different. With the consolidation and expression of the Nahua Mixteca style by after 1350, we also simultaneously get the definition of essentially a Nahua pantheon. What I was educated by H.B. Nicholson as being the Aztec pantheon, but it's not. It really has its roots that we can see in Cholula. Its definition is in Cholula. And so at this point, I want to focus on these two major structures, because although it's a colonial to modern city, colonial historical modern city, you can still, we have enough information that you can see, just as we do with the Templo Mayor in Mexico City today, you can visit and see where these cult areas that are defined in these manuscripts, in the codices, actually were. So we're going to, again, go back to the Great Pyramid, and then we're going to be looking at what is the Church of San Gabriel, but essentially it is the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. So we'll begin again with the Tlachihualtepet. Tlachihualtepet, as I've argued, is not a late phenomena. I think it was intentionally created in the Epi-Classic and early post-classic as a natural environment, a garden environment, on the basis of the cult that it inherited from Kakashla. This idea of the toad is clearly associated with Tlaloc. Just 150 miles south of Cholula in the Tehuacan Valley at Teotitlan del Camino, this remarkable 4-foot-tall censer of Tlaloc was found together with these toads. So the association for the Pueblo people between Tlaloc and the toads is very obvious. I love the toads, so I've got to feature them a little bit. I'll just give you a second. They remind me of pugs, but anyway, they clearly are demonstrate our association between a cult at Tlachihualtepet and Tlaloc. Now, at the same time, Tlachihualtepet is portrayed as being a garden to paradise. It is essentially in the historical record. This is what it looked like when the Tolteca and the Teca Chichimeca and the Olmeca Xicalonca hooked up. So essentially at about 850, 900,000. So it's a flower mountain. There's no question about it. And if those of you who would like to know more about the cult of this, the famous expert on man gods and on these cults, Alfredo Lopez Austin, wrote an excellent book on what Tamawanchan and Tlalocan together represent. They're shared names for a paradise. So I would refer you to that, and it's both in Spanish and in English. So what Tamawanchan is, it's portrayed in Codex Rios or Vaticanus A. It's regarded as being the 13th or highest heaven. It's a mythical place, and it's dominated by essentially a king of the gods or a master of the gods, Tonacatecutli, who is an avatar for Xochipilli, and his consort, Tonacasiwat, who is essentially Xochiquetzal. Karl Taub years ago argued that, in fact, Tonacatecutli, as his name means Lord of our sustenance. He's a Tecutli. These gods are all Tecutin. In fact, the transfer of Ishim, the Maya maize god, to the late post-classic pantheon. So as Xochipilli, he's actually the giant macaw. And this, of course, is an inheritance of the tradition of Ukukakish and seven macaw from the Maya, and a symbol of this concept of this god in the highest of all heavens, as being master of the primordial sunrise, primordial paradise, world of paradise of royal ancestors. So Sahagun also describes some of the attributes of Xochipilli. The Aztec writers tended to kind of blow this god off as being kind of a superficial god of fun and games and things. And that's the way I was sort of educated in this by H.B. Nicholson. And he really didn't, people were much more interested in focusing on the patrons of the empire, Huitzilopochtli and so forth, Tezcatlipoca. But here, this is obviously the core theme of this cult. So we know that he was patron god of the palace. He's patron god of the ball court. He's the patron god of royal marriages. And he is particularly associated with a calendrical name, Seven Flower, the glyph for which actually appears as on Tlachihualtepet, a Seven Flower Mountain, together with the principal symbol of Tamawanchan, which is the seven flower tree. So this concept of seven flower is important because, and an important attribute of Xochipilli and Tonacatecutli. Sahagun tells us that this was said to be the sign that he who is born on it would perform all crafts well. He would be a good craftsman. He would plan well his great works. And in fact, associated with this, and this would have been a major festival at Cholula, is the Feast of Flowers, the Xochihuit, in which all the painters, the weavers and embroiderers celebrated a feast. They fasted for 40 days in order to paint well and to weave textiles well. They performed ceremonies, the men to the god Chicomexochitl, seven flower, and the women to the goddess Xochiquetzal. So Xochiquetzal is presented, illustrated as a master weaver. A prayer to her, dedicated to her, talks about coming from the watery mistland, Tamawanchan. From near there I came, I Xochiquetzal. It's the house at the edge and in Tamawanchan. So the connection is equal for her with this concept of seven flower and seven flower mountain. So these are the two principal spirit forces in the post-classic associated with Tlachihualtepet. Munoz Camargo went on to talk about the goddess and said that she engaged in many pastimes, being served by other women like goddesses in great delights of springs and rivers and forests of great expectation. Perfect description of Tlalocan, Tamawanchan. Her entertainment was spinning and weaving exquisite and very curious things. In fact, Charisse McCafferty and Jeff McCafferty have written extensively about the enormous amount of spindle whorls that are found all around Cholula, and particularly from their UA1 excavations, for example. And of course, the continuation of these weaving traditions in Puebla and Oaxaca continues through through the colonial period, historical period, and the modern period. Now, there's something else that's very important here, and this goes back to the original cult that we see manifested in the early polychrome at Cholula. We know that Munoz Camargo tells us that in her service, in Xochiquetzal's service, there was a very great number of dwarves and hunchbacks, rogues and jesters who gave her solace and great music and dances and revels, and she trusted these people as her ambassadors. And that's a significant aspect of not only the Pochteca, but as I've said, these Tetacutin merchants. So it's no accident that Ixtliltón, who I discussed in my previous talk, is seen as her consort in Codex Borgia. So in summary, what we're seeing is not just a cult of this god and this goddess as kind of the patrons of a royal paradise, but in fact, everything that they preside over is the economic foundation for this entire system, and that it is largely predicated on gift wealth, dowry, bride wealth systems. I've written extensively about the fact that a Nahua or Mixtec lord might marry as many as 20 times or even more. The first wife will be the mother of the inheritor to the kingdom. The second wife might be a weaver. Her son then, instead of this idea of classes that my archaeologist colleagues are always running to Sahagun in order to project onto the rest of Mesoamerica, a close detailed examination of the cult of Xochiquetzal and Xochipilli shows that they're actually responsible for a significant part of the operational economy that dominates southern Mexico at this time. Now, in addition, Tlachihualtepet is still the flower world. It's still Tlalocan and Tamawanchan. It produces this area to the south of the pyramid, produces most of the flowers that are used for the festivals that take place across the year. And of course, the major festival is September 8th with the Fiesta of the Virgin de los Remedios, and the processions that are carried out across the city at this time. I would argue essentially that what you're looking at and in addition to this, I want to point out that historically, this isn't a festival dedicated just for Cholula. It draws in people from communities all over the adjacent areas of Veracruz, Oaxaca, the Valley of Mexico, Guerrero. And when this was studied in 1970, as many as 350,000 merchants and patrons of the associated market would come into Cholula at this time. That continues today. The last I heard, it's more around 150,000, but it still draws the same from the same communities that associate themselves with Cholula through these cults. So essentially then, I would argue that what you're seeing with the cults of San Miguel, who we'll talk about in a minute, and of course the Virgen de los Remedios, is just a continuation of exactly the system that we saw with the focus on these two structures, Tlachihualtepet and of course the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. Now, the Temple of Quetzalcoatl is known to you as well, any of you who have visited Cholula, because it's still there. You just don't recognize it, but that's it. That's the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. Although there is some evidence of pre-Columbian foundation work around this, archaeologists, this had been the headquarters of the Franciscan Order for North America. So obviously there isn't going to be a lot of permission to dig all of this up. And nevertheless, you don't have to. If you, in fact, accounts refer to this. this cult of Quetzalcoatl's Diego Duran. The Choluteca were merchants and very wealthy people. They celebrated a great and costly feast for the god called Quetzalcoatl because this divine patron had been the richest merchant of his time and the one who taught them the skills and laws of their trade. The merchants spent all they had earned during the year to sponsor the god's feast and show the grandeur and opulence of Cholula. So what you're really looking at is this is a confirmed location. But if you actually go up to the walls, and I find it interesting that the front of the church is stuccoed, but if you walk up to the sides of the church, you can see all the Tezatli, the pre-Columbian volcanic stone that was obviously the matrix of the temple of Quetzalcoatl in the walls of the side of the church. So what you're looking at is essentially the temple of Quetzalcoatl as it is today. Now, closely associated with this, and right behind it, is the temple of, or the church of San Miguel, this is the highest. Jonathan discussed this. This is the highest ranking barrio of Cholula. It's known as the Tanguis Nahuac, or it's associated with the residence of the pre-Columbian merchants. And its patron, so there's the Temple of Quetzalcoatl, and then there was a barrio of for the merchants here. And its patron is the church today is San Miguel. Tanguis is the root term. It means the market. Now, I've always been fascinated with this image that was done in the early 1700s about Cholula. It's published by Huguenot, French publisher in Holland. I have more information on this if you're interested, but it's the context that interests me. The text says le mercure des Mexicains adoré à Cholula sous le nom de Quetzalcoatl. Okay, so he was known as the Mercury of Cholula. And I got very interested in this, began to do some investigation. And we know who Mercury is. I mean, he's the divine ambassador, but he's also the patron god of merchants and commerce. Obviously, attributes that whoever made this association for the print thought was important. But why San Miguel? Well, I think there's a real reason behind this, and it's a testament to this concept of syncretism. I know that's not the best term to use for this. They're actually inventing a whole new cult here on the part of the Franciscans, because the official origin, according to the Catholic Church, of the first manifestation of the cult of San Miguel was constructed on the base of a temple of Mercury at the Santuario di San Michele Arcangelo, I don't have an Italian accent, at Monte San Angelo, Puglia, Italy. And this was also where the Lombard barbarians were actually baptized for the first time and worshipped a god that they equated with Mercury as well, and from an historical source. So what we're essentially seeing is this concept of the foundation of the cult of San Miguel on the cult of Mercury being projected into this image from Cholula as Quetzalcoatl, as the Mercury of Cholula. All right, so essentially, what you can see then are, and I have an article that accompanies this presentation. You can see that we can associate, just as we can with the Templo Mayor precinct in the Centro Histórico in Mexico City. We have every equal capability to reconstruct the cult center of Cholula today and associate it with its particular gods and particular cults. It's just something that's unexpected to us. It's not a cult of conquest. It's a cult of trade. It's a cult of marriages. It's a cult of alliance systems built to facilitate the interaction of these pure polities that are ruled by essentially independent kings, and particularly with the Nahuas, Tetacutin. All right, so the festival itself is of course the major event of the year, and I just again want to call your attention to the role that the sponsorship of this festival plays today in terms of it's being a competitive sponsorship. The just as we've been examining with this idea of these cargo systems, the mayordomos compete with each other for the investment into the sponsorship, not only of the feast, but even paying for and supplying. Here you see the mayordomos. These are their staffs. It's no accident to me they have these silver staffs. That's exactly what we're seeing in the iconography of Yakatekutli, for example. But also just to be able to feed the hundreds of people who attend the days-long festival associated with the Virgen de los Remedios. So that essentially what you're seeing is a rotational power structure, exactly as we've been discussing in a pre-Columbian incarnation. And so I just want to reiterate that Duran had said that today the natives of Cholula continue their trade and commerce with different merchandise, traveling through the most remote and distant parts of the land. Again, just as the Mapa de Cuauhtinchan 1 says, such as the Soconusco and Guatemala along the coast with their loads of goods, just as they did in ancient times. And then goes on to say, let us pray that they no longer do these things with faith in the old God. For there is a custom among the Choluteca that merchants will traffic for 10, 12, and even 20 years, earning and saving up to 300 pesos. And after all their toil, wretched, eating and sleeping without aim or reason, they offer a most lavish feast where they spend all of their savings in order to celebrate their titles and set themselves on high. This would not be wrong, except that for their celebration, they await the day on which the god Quetzalcoatl was honored. So we can just project it back, exactly the system we're seeing here. We can project directly back into this late post-classic period. All right, I just want to reiterate that as John has discussed, that in fact, the sponsorship of the feast it involves all of these different barrios and the mayordomos associated with them. But at the same time, the study of a cult of seven flower, of essentially Xochipilli, is also well known to us through decades of research by Alan Sandstrom and in terms of his study of this concept of post-Tekle. And John has made the connection then between this concept of post-Tekle as a foundational place, a place that essentially is the center for all of the barrios and pure polities that claim to have come from Cholula, and it's usually through some kind of cataclysmic event that they're created. And this is all projected into this as a traditional, a local post-Tekle among Nahua communities in Veracruz and across the Sierra de Puebla as well. So the Feast of Flowers, the Tlachihualtepet, it's a natural environment. It probably goes back to even the foundation of the early post-classic. And then I just want to emphasize that it's not the only one. There's a very famous archaeological site called Texcotzinco in the Valley of Mexico, and these are the legendary gardens of Netzahualcoyot. It was intentionally created in much the same way as we envision the Great Pyramid at Cholula in the post-classic as a natural environment. And then all of these baths and water channel systems were carved into the mountain together with, and this is fascinating, remember, these are Aztec artisans. They can create monuments like Coatlicue or the Calendar Stone, but there are pictographs that are intentionally carved into the stone of Tlaloc, for example. This was a garden paradise with pictographs on it. That was the retreat, a ritual retreat for one of the most powerful men in North America. But it is recognized, it was intentionally constructed as a natural paradise, with the imagery of Tlaloc and the fact that it was gardened. There are descriptions of all the different flowers and herbs and medicinal plants that were grown here purposely, is essentially what we're seeing here. So with the Temple of Quetzalcoatl, we also have a description in the Relación de Cholula, an illustration of colonial map of Cholula. But the one thing that in that Relación de Cholula is this, and this is my final statement, is this idea of Rome or Mecca. Offerings are brought by Indians who came from all over the land to pilgrimage to visit the temple of Quetzalcoatl because it was held in as much veneration as Rome is in Christendom and Mecca among the Moors. Well, you know, I find, and I don't mean to be, I don't mean to criticize my colleagues, but I find that most of my colleagues have a very little understanding of what what Rome and Mecca were in the 15th and 16th century. These were very, very powerful political forces and unifying forces among what are essentially two pure polity systems. The writers of statements like this understand completely what's going on here. Here's an image of the Vatican. I talked to colleagues today about the Vatican. They think of it as the Michelangelo dome and all of this. Actually, it was a huge administrative complex, but had nothing of that kind of ritual presentation. It was a coordinating headquarters of Christendom for most of Europe into Central Europe, and then of course the vast areas that these two cults, the Catholic cult out of the Vatican, Rome, and the Islamic cult out of Mecca, had for unifying these kingdoms was intense and powerful. And so this is exactly what we're proposing for Cholula and its relationship to the rest of Mesoamerica. In fact, we have exactly the same system. Again, we have a tendency to think that Mexico was conquered by the Spanish Empire. No, there was no Spanish Empire. It was a bunch of feudal people living in all of these little castles. Fernando and Isabel, for example, were constantly moving from castle to castle, from estate to estate, all over Castile and Aragon. And what held all of this together was this investment in an ideology. They could also be coerced. For example, probably the most the real power that a pope could wield out of the Vatican is excommunication. To us today, that just means, oh no, I'm not going to get into heaven. Well, at this time, excommunication meant that you were no longer part of the system, and you were wide open to be attacked and have all of your land stripped by any of your. We're constantly moving from castle to castle, from estate to estate, all over Castile and Aragon. And what held all of this together was this investment in an ideology. They could also be coerced. For example, probably the most the real power that a pope could wield out of the Vatican is excommunication. To us today, that just means, oh no, I'm not going to get into heaven. Well, at this time, excommunication meant that you were no longer part of the system, and you were wide open to be attacked and have all of your land stripped by any of your rivals. So the investment in the benefits of cooperation and exchange on the one hand, but also the tremendous power that these priests could also wield over these alliance systems at the same time. So this is what I'm proposing then, is this world that I was taught, for example, is due to the Aztec Empire influencing all these other parts of Mesoamerica back in the 70s, is in fact part of this buy-in. And I've given you an illustration of how this buy-in works for Oaxaca, but I would suggest that this is also working in the same way for the Yucatan Peninsula, for example, Highland Guatemala, for example, and across Oaxaca, and then ultimately for West Mexico, Northern Mexico, and the American Southwest, which in conclusion brings us to the fact that the redating of Casas Grandes has now brought Charles de Peso into our world. This middle post-classic world from 1350 to 1450 Casas Grandes is part of this system. So complaints about Charles de Peso and his Pochteca model. I don't go with the Pochteca model, but I certainly buy into the idea of this of these noble houses and expeditionary trade with these associated cult. So thank you very much for your patience. I added quite a lot of more information on how I see the importance of this world, and particularly focusing on Cholula this time.
Alrighty, thank you, John. Powerful PowerPoint.
Thank you.
I'm going to mention one of the last questions first. Well, Jesus first asked, why is one of the buildings inside the pyramid named Grasshoppers?
Because Alfonso Caso had first had an opportunity to see some of these paintings, and he was the one who suggested that they're grasshoppers. They look like skulls, but in fact, there's some adjacent bodies that kind of look like insect bodies next to the skulls. They're just sort of red lobes. We don't really know. I think they're actually. I think others actually call the mural the painted skulls. But that's the source of this identification, is that they were insects. So he called them grasshoppers.
All right. And then Jesus asks, are there ball courts in Cholula? But then Gary Bennett posted an image that said the city featured as many as 24 ball courts.
We do have a ball court marker, and that's been discussed by Javier Orcid. But because the city sits on top of the pre-Columbian city, it's very difficult to identify pre-Columbian structures of that kind. But I don't know of an historical reference that it could very well be. I just don't know the reference, but I would be very interested in looking that up.
All right, and then Dory, she says, John, in light of your historical discussion of the interplay between Central Mexico and Central America, how do you view the switch in Costa Rica from jadeite or greenstone to gold as the preferred material of prestige around 600 to 700?
Well, I see that as the influence of a Maya economy in Central America initially, and then this shift to gold work is a Central American phenomena. It's not a question of just any single material, like we've been sort of taught in the past that, well, the Mesoamericanists just couldn't get it together to invent metallurgy until 2,000 years after it was invented in the Andes. Well, that isn't really what we're looking at. We're looking at a package of traits, and the metallurgy is a characteristic, to me, of this decentralized system that's emerging in Central America in the late classic, early post-classic period, together with the polychrome and other attributes, pure polities, these trail networks that link all of these different primary chiefdoms throughout this region, and that it's the invention, the clever invention of a decentralized system using these objects as tools, particularly the gold work that bears iconography of, those pendants, for example, the iconography of frogs, the iconography of essentially sun gods or deities that we would call them Tonacatecutli. And then it is the invention of this package that actually gets transferred then to early post-classic Mexico. So the transition from jade to gold is, I think, a reflection of a shifting economy from classic Maya jade to a late post. Well, I mean, the idea of using gold for ornamentation, of course, is from, and it's Andean. I mean, so it's a shift in orientation, equally a shift in orientation for Central America.
John, could I ask you to go ahead and quit screen sharing?
Yeah, sure.
And your buddy Joseph is here, and I've asked him to unmute. He's finding a connection between the pectorals and the use of mirrors. Very interesting. Joseph, you want to go ahead and ask your questions or make your comments to John?
Sure. So, hey, John, how are you today?
Good. How are you, Joe?
Well,
Doing great.
first, John, you're still sharing your screen.
Okay. Oh, I got to get down here to. Okay.
All right. Go ahead, Joseph.
Okay, so John, what I found really interesting about your connection between the pectorals and the huichola, the Wararica mirror usage. It's very interesting because I may have told you this recently, but my father was kind of recounting some of the moments that he had witnessed the Huichol pilgrimages go through the mesa he lived on. And one of the things that he would mention, and he frequently talked about to us, even as kids, but we didn't really catch on, was the fact that when the Wararica were coming through the mesa, one of the first things they were asking for were mirrors. And they would actually bring quite a few goods, and they were willing to barter and exchange goods. A lot of it would just be articles of clothing, prayer arrows, things of that nature, in exchange for mirrors.
Wow.
And my father moved out of the mesa in probably 1965 or 68ish or so. And he said that procession would still continue until that time period. So it'd be really interesting. And I know you and I have talked about me going down there and doing some research and seeing if the pilgrimage still goes through there. But regardless, it's really interesting, and it's a really close connection between the pectorals and the usage of mirror, and especially with bartering and commerce and economy.
Yeah, no kidding. No, it'd be fascinating to see what's still being used. And if they're not using mirrors, what are they using? Well, we know they're still invested in the bowls. Bowls are the equivalent to the polychrome.
Exactly.
Mirrors are the equivalent to the gold pectoral. The two of them, Mike Mathiewicz argues, are the attributes of this cargo system, this rotational power system for the sponsorship of this. Well, essentially what this is the continuation of what had been, we all believe, a major trade network that extended from the Pacific coast into the Central Sierra and out into the Huastec area. I didn't bring it up, but in fact, the Spanish court historian Herrera said that he knew where he identifies Chicamostoc. And he's discussing one of the towns, the city-states on the Mapas de Cuautinchan. And he says that Chicamostoc is located, well, it's the equivalent to 120 miles north of the Valley of Mexico. Well, that's San Luis Potosí.
Okay,
So
yeah.
these guys,
Seems about right,
the Cuautinchan map guys are tying themselves into directly the location that the Huichol still continue to be carrying out their peregrination today, which essentially is a trade route.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, thank you. I just wanted to share that connection. I thought it was really
No, I
interesting.
entirely agree. And many of us are, instead of running to Sahagún to learn about Pochteca, most of us are now advocating that we need to be talking, we need to be working with the Huichol. They understand how this system works for city-state building and economy.
Exactly. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Fortunately, it's been trivialized as a tourist phenomena or some kind of esoteric. It has a history, of course, going back to the 70s of this kind of Don Juan esoteric desert wisdom seeker stuff, and that isn't what it is at all. It's completely embedded in metaphor, but the economy is behind it. It's all in there.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
All right. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you.
I hear you have a lot to offer our audience, and I'm going to get your email address from John and to see if you could do a program for us next year.
Me?
Yes.
Oh, that would be great. One of the things I'd like to share that I managed to pull up while I was kind of rustling and unmuting the microphone. So, my father, just a little background, my father comes from a really remote area in northwest Jalisco. And my family are actually Southern Tepecanos. And so, speak a little bit of the Piman language. But one of the things that my aunt was able to secure from one of her Huichol friends was this. And this, I don't know if I've showed John a photo of this yet, but this
Yeah, I
is
saw it on your
on my LinkedIn. Yeah.
yeah.
So this was part of a barter system here, and so it wasn't traded for mirrors, but the woman that the woman that we got this from was actually walking back to an area called Tuxpan de Bolaños, and it's a 2-week walk, and she refused a car ride. And so what she was just willing to barter for were just jugs of water and enough food so she can get back to town. And this is one of the things that she gave my father. So this was taken from her 5-year-old who no longer fit in it. And it was, again, part of a bartering system where she refused a ride in an automobile and was willing to walk back home. And she estimated it would take about 2 weeks to do. And she's done it numerous times. So I agree with you,
Boy, this is why this work of Johannes Neurath is so important to us, because he emphasizes this, is that we're not dealing with goods here. The problem that I've got with I worship all of my Aztec colleagues, Franny Berdan and Ken Hirth and Michael Smith, and all of their studies of political economies and all of this. And what have I got? I got all this goofy stuff of people handing bells back and forth to each other, and I mean, the Mayas have got the same thing, I mean, I spent all those years watching conferences at UT only to find out that a monument tells me that a king on a monument is doing the sprinkling act or something of that nature. It's still gonna take a lot of work to understand what these actually represent and why they are commemorating them, because they actually are signals. They are signaling to us what the real information is with regard to what we're really interested in, which is a more Marxist approach to how the society functions.
Exactly. No, you're right.
All right. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you.
That's Hyun Tae.
Yeah, Hung Tae. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. And Professor on board, this is Hung Tae Young, and thank you for your nice presentation. And I'm very happy to hear about the Cholula since my joining the exhibition in 2012. Yeah, the Children of Quetzalcoatl, right? Yeah.
Oh,
It was
yeah.
first time. Yeah, it was first time that I encountered Cholula. Yeah, Cholula outside of Tenochtitlan, and I have some kind of few comments and even some possibly one question here. And I wish that while I studying for my dissertation study at SUNY Albany in New York, I found that the vertical heaven in the Codex Vaticanus is a Christian influence, yeah, because of the long-term interaction long-term interaction by the now scholars with the Spanish monks, some kind of the structure of the other world, like that of the Codex Borgia,